The screen went dark in the middle of a scream. Supreme Warlord Caxdell did not move. He had not moved in 11 minutes. The holographic display above his throne had shown 4,000 ships entering orbit around a Tier 4 world. Now it showed nothing. No hulls. No wreckage field large enough to matter. No survivors calling home. No warning had come first. No declaration had been sent. No signal had explained what was about to happen to the undying wrath and everything behind her. 4,000 ships. 11 minutes. Not one voice left to answer the question burning through every remaining Kathavar mind on that bridge. And the blue planet kept broadcasting. Music, arguments, sports scores in 40 languages. The chatter of a species that, by every scan on record, had never even noticed a fleet arrive above its head, let alone destroy one. Caxdell's crest feathers had not flattened. That was the detail his aide would remember years later and never mention aloud. A Kathavar warlord watching his fourth expansion group erased from the galaxy, and his crest sat perfectly still, the way it did when he was thinking, not when he was afraid. "Run it again," he said. His voice carried the low, subsonic hum that meant he was choosing every word. "From the moment we lost contact." The tactical officer's claws hesitated over the panel. "Supreme Warlord, there is nothing to run. The feed simply stops." 40% debris mass. That was the number the first probe would send back, weeks from now, and it would mean less than nothing, because 40% of 4,000 ships was still 1,600 ships worth of metal that should have been floating somewhere and wasn't. Something was wrong, not battle wrong, not even defeat wrong. Wrong in a way 4,000 years of conquest had never taught him to recognize. "I'll tell you now, because you'll want the truth before the ending tries to take it from you." What waited above that planet had been waiting a very long time, and it was not finished waiting. 47 years earlier, 6 people walked down a staircase cut into granite, 300 feet under a mountain that did not appear on any public survey. The meeting existed in no government record. The 17 people already seated at the table held no titles anyone outside that room would ever verify. Admiral Elena Vasquez set her coffee down last. The mug was navy blue, chipped along the rim, the crack worn smooth by 20 years of her thumb running over it without thinking. She looked at the 16 faces around her and said 4 words. "They've been watching us." The room did not erupt right away. It took a second for the words to land, and then it did erupt, questions stacked on questions. A general half standing before he caught himself, an intelligence officer named Moxville going very quiet and very pale. General Marcus Webb was the one who asked the right question. He always was. He didn't raise his voice. "How long?" 14 months, Vasquez said. "That we know of. Longer, probably." She tapped the table, and the images came up, grainy, partial, 3 ships holding position just past the heliopause, patient as stone. Not human ships, nothing close. "They're not here to talk," she said. "Species that talk first don't sit outside a system for over a year running passive scans. We have their sensor logs from an intercepted probe. 22 civilizations. Full records, languages, cities, faces. All of them gone now. Conquered or erased. We're next on a list we didn't know existed until 6 weeks ago." Moxville's voice came out smaller than he meant it to. "Does anyone else know?" "Approximately 943, Vasquez said. "Scientists, engineers, officers, people we vetted personally, one at a time over 4 years, 0 leaks, not one." She let that sit. "People keep secrets when the secret is big enough. This one is the size of a species." Webb leaned back. "And your plan for a 14-month head start against something that's conquered 22 worlds." "My plan isn't for 14 months. Vasquez's thumb found the crack in the mug again, an old habit nobody in the room had noticed yet, though every one of them eventually would. "My plan is for 47 years. 6,000 ships, built in the asteroid belt, wrapped in ice and regolith so nothing reads as a hull. Reactors that don't register on any known scan signature we've ever detected from them. fully autonomous weapon systems, so we never need more crew than we can trust with our lives. Silence, the kind that has weight. 47 years, Webb repeated. You're talking about a program that outlives most of the people in this room. I'm talking about a program that has to. Vasquez looked at each of them in turn, slow, deliberate, the way she'd look at a subordinate she needed to remember something forever. Nobody at this table sees the end of this. Our children might not either. We are building something we will never get to use, for people we will never get to meet, because the alternative is that everyone we love ends up a name in someone else's conquest log. I need 17 signatures tonight, not for glory. Nobody will ever know your names. I need them because it's the only version of this where our grandchildren get to grow old. One by one, they signed. Construction began 4 months later, in the dark between Mars and Jupiter, where sunlight was thin and eyes were thinner. The first hull went up wrapped in a shell of scavenged ice, indistinguishable on any long-range scan from 10,000 other drifting rocks that had been doing exactly nothing for 4 billion years. Nobody called it a fleet yet. For the first 19 years, it was barely a rumor even to the people building it, a rotating crew who arrived without names, worked without records, and left without ever telling their own families where they had been. They called it Project Exodus Dark. Nobody outside the mountain ever heard the name. Vasquez was 61 the year she stood in the same buried room and told her successor there would be no retirement ceremony, no plaque, no mention in any file that would exist after she was gone. She was 79 the year she handed the mug, actually handed it, across a table to a man 40 years younger, and said only, "Keep it. It helps to have something to hold on to when the numbers get big." She died at 84, the program's existence still known to fewer than 2,000 people on the entire planet. By then the fleet numbered past 4,000 hulls, and it was still growing, still hidden, still waiting for a war that hadn't started yet, patient in a way that a species with 22 conquests behind it had never once had to be. The dismissal took 4 seconds. Supreme Warlord Caxtol reviewed the survey report on a Tier 4 world called Earth the way he reviewed every Tier 4 world, without rising from his throne. Mid-range technology. No unified government. No detectable fleet assets. A species too busy fighting itself to notice anything else. "Send Drextel," he said. "Standard incursion protocol, nothing fancy." Commander Drextel received the assignment as an insult dressed as an honor. 4,000 ships for a world with no defenses was not a war. It was paperwork with engines. He'd asked for something with teeth, the Cygni's arm maybe, where actual resistance still flickered in the dark corners of Dominion space. Instead, he got a blue rock and a training exercise for junior officers who'd never fired on a live target. He didn't know the target had spent 47 years training for him. Fleet Admiral James Kowalski had inherited the mug 3 years before Vasquez died, though nobody outside the mountain would have called it inheritance. She'd simply set it down in front of him one afternoon and told him to keep it, and he had, without asking why, because by then he understood that some orders in that room weren't really orders. They were the closest thing to a blessing the program allowed itself. He was 58 now, and Vasquez had been gone 6 years, and the fleet she'd started with a handful of scientists in a mountain had grown into something that no longer fit any word he was comfortable using. Armada came close. Even that felt small standing in the command deck of the Reckoning, watching 6,000 hulls hold formation in the dark between worlds, wrapped in ice, waiting for a war his predecessor had known was coming before most of the people fighting it were born. His sensor officer, Commander Sarah Chen, kept her voice level in a way that told him she was working hard at it. "Contact confirmed. Kathavar fleet, 4,000 strong, entering Sol system on standard incursion vector. ETA to Earth orbit, 6 hours. Confirm autonomous systems are green across the fleet," Kowalski said. "Green board, all 6,000. He didn't say anything for a moment. 6 hours. 47 years condensed down to 6 hours, and after that, Nothing that any of the people who'd built this would ever have to worry about again, one way or another. "Hold position," he said. "Let them get comfortable." Drextel's forward screens filled with the blue-white marble the reports had promised, and for a moment he almost understood why Command bothered with worlds like this at all. There was something to be said for the color. He activated the broadcast, the same words spoken to 22 worlds before this one, words that had never once needed a follow-up. "You are hereby designated as property of the Kathavar Dominion. Cease all defensive posturing. Compliance will be rewarded." Nothing answered. No panic on the surface. No scramble of primitive interceptors. Exactly the silence his intelligence briefing had predicted from a world with no fleet worth the name. His sensor officer's voice cracked before the sentence finished. Not called out, not reported, screamed. "Commander, contact, bearing 007. Multiple contacts. Multiple, sir. I'm reading thousands." Where empty space had been a heartbeat earlier, space's own scanners had triple confirmed clean on approach, space that had shown nothing but starlight and the ordinary drift of an asteroid belt going about its business. Hulls were shedding their ice shells like something waking up. Hundreds, then 1,000. Then more than his display had room to count cleanly, angular black shapes built for exactly one purpose, arranged around his 4,000 ships in a pattern that meant they had known his exact course, his exact speed, his exact arrival time, for longer than he wanted to think about. Drextel's crest feathers, unlike his warlords, flattened completely against his skull. "Belay incursion protocol," he managed. "Belay, evasive, all ships evasive." The order never finished traveling down the chain of command. It didn't have time to. The undying wrath died first, and it died fast. No drawn-out engagement. No exchange of fire that gave anyone watching a chance to understand what was happening before it was over. One moment she was Drextel's flagship. 4 seconds later, she was debris expanding outward in a slow, bright bloom. And every other Kathavar vessel in formation understood, in the space of a single held breath, that the things surrounding them had not come to negotiate. On the Reckoning's bridge, nobody cheered. Kowalski watched the tactical display with the same stillness Vasquez had trained into 3 generations of program leadership, his hand resting on the edge of a console instead of the mug, which sat untouched at his elbow, catching the low red battle light along its old familiar crack. Chen's voice stayed steady this time. "Enemy fleet engaging countermeasures. Minimal effect." "Continue," Kowalski said. Ship after Kathavar ship broke formation, scattered, tried maneuvers built for enemies that behaved the way 4,000 years of conquest had taught them enemies behaved. None of it mattered. The human fleet didn't chase. It didn't need to. It simply closed the distance that remained, methodical as a held breath finally released, and kept closing it. Somewhere in the belt behind them, in a room that no longer existed because the person who'd built it had been dead 6 years, a photograph nobody would ever find showed 17 signatures on a single page. Every one of them had known this exact moment might come, might never come, might come to grandchildren instead of themselves. It had come now, to a bridge full of people none of the 17 had ever met, carrying out a plan longer than most of their lives. The 11 minutes ended the way they'd begun, without warning, without mercy, without a single ship given the chance to explain itself. The undying wrath died in 4 seconds. What remained of the Kathavar 4th expansion group lasted longer, but not by much, and none of it mattered by the time it was over. No distress signal got through. No survivor answered a hail. No wreckage sat where wreckage should have sat, because Kowalski's fleet didn't leave things behind the way other fleets did. "Commence Phase 2, he said. 6,000 human ships broke formation in a pattern that had been rehearsed for decades by crews who'd never once run it against a live enemy. They didn't celebrate. They didn't linger. Each vessel peeled away toward one of 17 pre-designated waypoints scattered across the outer system, moving with the unhurried precision of something that had never needed to hurry, because hurry was what you did when you were afraid of being seen. and being seen was the one thing this fleet had spent 47 years learning never to be again. By the time the sun rose over the part of Earth that would eventually be told none of this had happened, salvage teams had already swept the battle site clean. Every drifting hull fragment large enough to register on a scan had been collected, catalogued, and hidden in the same ice-wrapped anonymity that had hidden the fleet itself. What remained where 4,000 ships had died was, for all practical purposes, empty space. Kowalski stood at the Reckoning's forward viewport a long while before he spoke again. His hand finally found the mug at his elbow. He didn't drink from it. He just held it, the way Vasquez used to, thumb finding the old familiar crack without seeming to notice he was doing it. "Send it," he said. 3 words, nothing more. The message that reached Earth Command that morning read, "Tell them it worked." Supreme Warlord Caxtel had not slept in 11 days by the time the first probe report reached him, and the report did not help. 40% of expected debris mass. No energy signatures matching any species in the Dominion's 4,000-year record. 0 survivors. And the planet below exactly as previously assessed. Tier 4. No unified government. No detectable fleet assets of any kind. His aide had never seen his expression before that morning. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was closer to the look of someone doing arithmetic that refused to add up no matter how many times he ran it. "Send the second fleet," Caxtel said. 3 times the size of the first. I want every frequency swept, every wavelength. If there is a hull anywhere in that system, I want it found. The second fleet arrived weeks later and searched for 3 straight weeks, with instruments upgraded specifically for the task. Cloaking detection, suites tuned to sensitivities no Kathavar engineer had ever needed to build before. They found nothing. The blue planet continued its business below them, broadcasting sports and arguments and music, gloriously, maddeningly unaware, exactly as it had appeared before 4,000 ships vanished above it. Fleet Commander Brixtel reviewed his own sensor logs for the 10th time and filed a report that would follow him for the rest of his career. Inconclusive. No evidence of advanced spacefaring civilization detected. Recommend continued monitoring. He did not recommend invasion. In 4,000 years of Kathavar conquest, no fleet commander had ever looked at a Tier 4 world and quietly decided, not yet. The years that followed were not kind to Caxtel's certainty. He diverted resources no warlord should have diverted, deep space sweeps across 100 systems, intelligence assets pulled from 3 active campaigns, an entire division reassigned to hunt for a fleet that behaved, by every available measure, like it had never existed in the first place. Nothing turned up. Not a hull, not a signal, not one defector, spy, or captured scout willing to confirm even the shape of what had happened above that blue planet. Somewhere in that stretch of years, Caxtel allowed himself, quietly and only once, to consider that perhaps the attack had come from some other advanced power passing through, that Earth itself had simply been lucky, an innocent bystander to a war it never knew was fought over its own sky. It was, he would later admit to almost no one, the single largest miscalculation of his 4 centuries of command. On Earth, the mountain kept its silence the way it always had. Dr. Maria Vasquez, third of her line to sit at that buried table, inherited a program that had already outlived its founder by nearly a decade, and a mug that had somehow survived 3 handovers without so much as a new chip in its rim. She was not there for glory. Nobody in that room ever had been. She sat through briefings about a war nobody outside a few thousand people knew had been fought, and she signed authorizations for a fleet that existed nowhere on any register a historian would ever find. And some nights she wondered, the way her grandmother must have wondered, whether any of it would matter to species too busy fighting itself to ever learn what had been done to keep it alive. Then the Kathavar Dominion turned its attention to the Cygni's arm. It wasn't Earth. It wasn't even close to Earth, a cluster of systems on the far side of Dominion space, home to 3 species who'd spent a generation trying to hold their own borders against exactly the kind of campaign now bearing down on them. 18,000 HFY warships entered Cygni's territory under Caxtel's personal command, the largest single deployment of his career, meant to close the question of Dominion supremacy once and for all. Kowalski received the intelligence report in the same buried room Vasquez had once stood in, and read it twice before he set it down. "They're not stopping," he said. 22 civilizations wasn't the end of the list, it was the middle of it. Nobody in the room needed him to finish the thought. For 47 years, the fleet had existed to protect one planet. Nobody had ever written down what it was supposed to do if the war it was hiding from decided to keep going without them. Kowalski looked at the mug on the table in front of him, and for the first time in his career, he didn't reach for it right away. "Get me a course to Cygni's," he said, "and tell the fleet to decloak the moment we arrive, all of it, every ship. Let them see us this time." The Cathavar fleet at Cygni's Arm had 18,000 warships in formation when 6,000 human hulls dropped their cloak in the space between one heartbeat and the next, arranged around them the exact same way they'd once arranged themselves around Drextel's 4,000 ships. Caxtel didn't need his sensor officer to scream this time. He saw it happen with his own eyes, live, on the main display, and he understood immediately what he was looking at, because he'd spent years hunting the shape of exactly this absence. The transmission that followed carried no threat in its tone. It didn't need one. "You will leave the Cygni's campaign immediately," the voice said, Kowalski's voice, steady, unhurried. "These are not requests. No warning shots, no opening salvo, no demonstration of what those 6,000 ships could do to 18,000, because everyone on that bridge already knew, and knowing was the whole point." Caxtel did something none of his officers had ever seen him do in 4 centuries of command. He stood down his weapons across the entire fleet, all at once, and then he did something no Cathavar warlord had done in 4,000 years of conquest. He asked to talk. The meeting happened aboard a neutral vessel at coordinates neither side would ever release. Caxtel on one side of a table with no weapons visible anywhere in the room. Kowalski on the other with the mug set in front of him, untouched, the crack catching the low light the same way it always had. "Explain it to me," Caxtel said. His crest feathers had flattened, and stayed flattened, in a way his aides would have found impossible to describe as anything but genuine. 47 years. You built an armada large enough to erase my 4th expansion group in 11 minutes, and you told no one, not your own governments, not your allies. Why hide strength like that? Kowalski turned the mug a quarter turn before he answered, an old habit that wasn't his originally. "Because the moment the whole galaxy knows you have it," he said, "everyone starts planning around it. Every enemy adjusts. Every ally starts asking for a share. A weapon everyone knows about is a weapon everyone eventually finds a way to beat." He let that sit. "A weapon no one knows about is the only kind that still works exactly the way you built it to work, the day you finally need it." "For one planet," Caxtel said. "You built this for one planet." "We built it for our children," Kowalski said. "That's not the same thing to us as it is to you. Humanity is divided. We fight about almost everything, borders, money, whose God is real. But there is one thing every human being, every culture, every language that has ever existed agrees on without being asked. We protect our children. When that's threatened, we don't need unity. We don't need agreement. We just need enough people willing to disappear for the rest of their lives, so the people they love never have to." Caxtel studied him a long moment. "Your Admiral Vasquez, she began this." "She never saw the end of it," Kowalski said. "Neither will I. That was the deal from the start. Nobody who built this fleet ever expected to be thanked for it." He reached into the case beside him and set a data slate on the table between them. 22 civilizations," he said. "Every one your dominion erased. Their histories, their art, their languages, their names. We recovered what we could from your own archives years ago, and we kept it, not as a weapon, as a record. They are not entirely gone, Supreme Warlord," somebody remembered. For a long moment, Caxtel said nothing at all. The order came within the hour, transmitted on every Dominion frequency at once, in Caxtol's own voice. With none of the ceremony 4,000 years of Cathavar command usually demanded. Suspend the Cygnes campaign. Release every vassal species currently held under Dominion occupation. Broadcast, fleet-wide, permanent, threat assessment, do not engage. It did not collapse an empire. It didn't need to. The Cathavar Dominion continued exactly as it had for 4,000 years, in every way that mattered to the systems it still governed, except that somewhere in its command structure, a warlord who had never lost a battle had quietly, permanently, changed the math everyone beneath him was required to run before starting the next one. Weeks later, a single Cathavar probe reached the edge of the Sol system, at the heliopause, where nothing but starlight and old silence usually waited. It found a marker instead, small, deliberately unremarkable. 22 names etched into its surface in a script the probe's translation matrix took 4 attempts to render correctly, because it wasn't Cathavar script at all. It was every one of the 22 languages the Dominion had spent 4,000 years trying to erase, placed there in recognition, by hands that had never once needed the credit. Dr. Maria Vasquez read the final report at the same buried table her grandmother had once stood beside, with 16 strangers and a chipped mug, though the room had modernized twice. Since then, and half the granite walls were screens now instead of stone. 4 months of quiet, 23 civilizations that would otherwise have been ash by now, the 22nd recovered, and the newest, humanity itself, never even scratched. She set the tablet down. The mug sat in front of her, still cracked, still worn smooth along the rim, where 3 generations of thumbs had traced the same line without ever discussing why. She didn't drink from it. She just rested her hand against the ceramic and felt the last of the morning's heat still held there, faint but real. Her grandmother would have found that sufficient. 50 years after that, an old man sat on a porch with his granddaughter, pointing up at nothing in particular. Just the ordinary dark, unremarkable, the same sky that had hung over every human being who'd ever lived without most of them knowing what moved through it. They're still out there, he told her. The fleet, somewhere, nobody's ever going to put them on the news. Why not? She asked. Because that was never the point. He was quiet a moment. The invisible kind, he said. The best kind, the kind you don't see until the moment someone needs them most. The girl looked up at the stars a while longer, the way children do when they've been told something too large to hold all at once. He didn't say anything else. He just watched her watching the sky, and somewhere past the edge of everything either of them could see, 6,000 ships held their old formation in the dark, still wrapped in ice, still waiting, still exactly where no one would ever think to look.